Now, today, we talk about Humanism 2.0. And one of the famous and really doing a difference guys who makes a big difference in our world, who stands for Humanism 2.0, is Salim. Salim, please.
Thank you, Steffi.
Go
Thank
ahead.
you for having us here.
Singularity University comes to Russia.
I'm here with my colleague, Brad Templeton, and our aim today is for these two short talks to be the highlight of your day. So let us know at the end of the day if these are the most interesting talks that you do. I'm somewhat the resident philosopher at SU. I'm the founding executive director, and I'm now working on the global rollout of it. And I've titled this talk Exponentials and Thermodynamics. Right? We are both hosted at NASA in Silicon Valley, and we bring together the top thinkers in the world in the fastest moving technologies. And we're seeing the growth of computing impact many, many different domains. And we study these technologies. Our two core founders are Ray Kurzweil, who many of you know, and Peter Diamandis. What Ray showed is that the price performance of computing has been going up on an exponential basis for over 100 years. Through wars, through recessions, through ups and downs in the semiconductor industry. And the question he asked himself was why? Why is that curve so smooth when you have all of this disruption in society? And he came up with a fundamental observation that once you take any domain or discipline and ground it in information properties, it goes into an exponential growth path. And then nothing will shake it off that path after that. Peter's just written a book called Abundance, which is on the New York Times bestseller list right now, showing how these technologies can deliver us abundance. In the same way, when we went from film photography to digital photography, we entered instantly into an abundance of photography, maybe too many. But we have that opportunity in many other domains right now. We've seen extraordinary progress in the world over the last 100 years. A phone call 100 years ago cost a day's wages to make across the US, and today that's essentially free. And we're seeing this extraordinary progress in domain after domain, mostly powered by technology. We study the aspects of these technologies that are all doubling in their price performance anywhere from 18 to 30 months. And we bring together the top speakers and thinkers in the world on how to think about these technologies, whether it's Vint Cerf, who invented the internet, or Dean Kamen, who's doing the robotic arm, Craig Venter, who sequenced the first genome. And these folks come and do talks throughout the summer and throughout our programs talking about where are these cutting-edge technologies going. I've had the privilege of listening to most of them over this 3-year period as we've been building out this organization. As an example, you may have seen this talk by Eric Schmidt. He noticed that it took us all of history to create 5 exabytes of information from the beginning of time to 2003. 2 years ago, we did that every 2 days. And by next year, we'll be creating 5 exabytes of information every 10 minutes. Right? We're seeing an utter explosion in the world of information. Notice that your memories are not in your heads anymore, they're in your devices. Right? And so we're literally expanding the human being into this digital realm. All of the sensors on your smartphones are pumping out information. There's several sensors on your smartphones that are just churning out data. And we're seeing this rise. Today we have about 2 billion connected devices on the internet. By 2025 we'll have about 50 billion. And we've seen estimates that by 2050 we'll see 1 trillion connected devices on the internet. So we're turning the world literally in front of our eyes into data and into information. Now all of the new companies are being built on this paradigm. Let's note that Google is a $200 billion company essentially by manipulating text and now video. Facebook, a $100 billion company by digitizing relationships and turning that into information. We've got Foursquare and Groupon attacking the Yellow Pages industry. Thank God, somebody's doing it. And then as we get into sensor networks, the Internet of Things, as the proliferation of sensors works, we expect to see the first $1 trillion company somewhere up in here as we take and extract value out of all of that data, if Apple doesn't get there first. 3D printing is an example many of you are familiar with. That $2,000 3D printer will print 70% of the parts to make the next printer. And within a decade, the printers will be fabricating themselves. We're at that point. This is actually metal. We're not at the point where we can fabricate and 3D print metal. And this is a 3D printed bicycle, which you can see on YouTube, where they've printed a bicycle in 3D using this layer-by-layer technology. And then you get on the bike and ride away. And the key inflection point in 3D printing, for the first time in history, complexity is free. It used to be the more complex an object, the more it costs to make. design, materials, etc. And that's free. Now this is hitting the news and it's all very sexy, but actually on the underlying level it's causing a lot of disruption in society. Okay? If you look at what's happening around the world, society is not ready for the pace of change that technology is bringing. The financial crisis was caused by the acceleration in the underlying derivatives and other instruments, and our leaders around the world fundamentally don't see that paradigm. And that's essentially one of the things we're out to fix. So I put this date up there. Does anybody know why that date is significant, October 31st, 2000? Anyone? It's the date that the first crew lifted off for the International Space Station. Right? And I'll come back to why that's relevant. I've been working on this idea with Malcolm Pollock, who's a friend of mine, a Grammy Award nominee, software developer, philosopher, etc. And Malcolm and I have been struggling as to how do we make sense of all the change in the world today? How do we frame it in a way that makes some sense? And we've come up with an example using high school physics. So I'm going to take you back to high school physics. This is the ideal gas law, which says that if you have a gas in a container, pressure and volume on one side, and temperature, molecular value, and number of molecules on the other side. Simply put, if you heat up a contained gas, the pressure goes up. Or if you push the pressure down and increase the pressure, the temperature goes up. Right? Standard high school physics. So when you have enough energy into a system, let's say ice, where the molecules are cold, local, they don't move very much, the ice turns into water. In water, the molecules expand to the boundaries of the system, and you get a lot more motion and fluidity and medium heat in there. When you get to steam, now the molecules are all over the place. They'll expand into the container in which you put them, and they're hard to recapture, and it's hot. Right? So as we put more energy into the system, it goes through phase transitions and phase changes. And it occurred to us that this was a good way of trying to frame what's happening in the world today. So our thesis is that with technology, we're heating up the world and putting a lot more energy into it. The distance between ourselves as molecules is reducing because of communications. We bump into each other in the Moscow streets, at conferences, at airports, and the distance between us as molecules, we're all now highly energized and highly activated molecules running around the world. So let's take a couple of examples. If we take messaging, back in the old days, we used to send message around by Pony Express or by smoke signals or other methods, right? Then we developed in a more, and note that they're localized, they stay in a local region, they don't move very far or very fast. When you get to the next level of energy and you put a little more technology into it, you have postal mail, and ships carry mail around, it's a bit more liquid. If you take the analogy all the way out, we now have, oops, I've lost my thing. We now have fully the ether. We send an email, now it's in the vapor, it's out in the world. That's a picture of all the tweets going across, and you can see the cloud, the steam, the vapor analogy there. Once you send that message, you can't recapture it, right? And so this is happening in the messaging domain. If we look at money, we used to trade goats and camels. Very local, very slow, not a lot of speed about the system. Then we created asset-backed currencies in the gold standard, and we had a little more liquidity in the system. Then we started emailing the money around using PayPal, and that heated it up a bit more. Now we have virtual currencies, and the extreme level of that is the attention economy, where I can put up a web page, get somebody's mental attention, and turn that directly into money. And so now we've vaporized money, right? Let's look at computing. We had hardware, software, then we had internet computing, and of course cloud computing, which takes the analogy fully. So what we're seeing is in domain after domain, we're taking an area, using technology to heat it up and move it from ice to water to steam. We could even map specific industries like mining or construction that are kind of cold and frigid and not very liquid. Automobiles, and you'll hear from Brad in the next talk how we're taking automobiles and powering that information. And if you get to the media side with music, newspapers, we're fully in the steam, right? And we're turning this, and you have all of the requisite issues that come up with that: copying, recapturing information, tracking, etc. However, and you can take all of these, we've done a whole set of layers. If you can see the bottom here, in society we used to have clans or tribes, and then nation states, a little bit more liquidity. Then we heated it up a bit more, and we had multinational corporations and free trade zones. And now we have Facebook groups operating completely in the ether, in vapor. And so we vaporized our societal structures and those live in the internet now. And you can take that all the way out to a whole set of different ideas, and Malcolm and I have been looking at it. Now, when you have steam, there's a couple of issues around it. First is it will try and escape out of any container you try and put around it. Second is it's hard to recapture, and it will burn you. It's hot. And so what we're seeing is the communications is reducing the space between us as molecules in the world. And we're putting a lot more energy in the world. Everything's colliding with everything else. And we're turning domain after domain from ice to liquid to vapor. Okay? Now, there's a couple of issues. When you have a vapor state, stable structures do not form. So from a societal level, look at the Occupy Wall Street movement or the Arab Spring or the Tea Party movement in America. Lots of vapor, lots of hot air, but it's not realized yet into any solid structures. And the question is, as we turn the world into this vapor state, how do stable structures form? And we simply don't have an answer to that. What we're seeing is, now Apple, maybe there's an insight here, Apple has managed, they sell hardware, which is kind of cool, they sell software, and they sell the cloud. And maybe having a bit of, in each domain, is what's led them to creating the most valuable company in the world, right? We have old ways of cooling ourselves down. Society developed lots of other old methods, like government, or legal systems, or religions, or spirituality. This is a photograph of the Delhi police force meditating before they go out on their beat. Right? We have old mechanisms like this in society to do this. But these technologies are moving so quickly that we can't keep pace. This is a photograph from one of Brad's slides. This is the Fourth Amendment in the US Constitution, the right to privacy, which is washing away in front of our eyes with no public discourse, because we have no method to deal with the fact that all our private information is now out in the cloud. This is the patent system, the intellectual property system and the patent system, fundamentally broken. This is a patent granted in the year 2000 for making toast, because apparently nobody had ever made toast before the year 2000. Right? So just to show you that our systems are fundamentally not able to cope with this. This is a photograph from our curriculum planning sessions. Although we have the best speakers in the world coming to speak, we cannot become an accredited, state-sanctioned educational university, because to do that you have to fix your curriculum and not change it. And we change our curriculum every program because we deal with the fastest moving technologies. We have to. So how do we manage this? How does any regulatory structure keep pace as technology is accelerating away from us? All of our societal structures evolved in a time when we were local and linear. And today we're global and in an exponential world. Right? In the US, we're pepper spraying our civics. And literally the political world is at a complete standstill because of this paradigm. We have this huge issue happening in the Arab Spring. If you're interested in this, I did a talk, TEDx talk called Occupy Mail Street, where I talk about the need for female archetypal structures to manage the world in a much better way than our traditional way of doing it. So what's next? How do we handle this? How are we going to cope as technology moves us so quickly forward? So if I go back to the equation, we could try and drop the temperature. And what that means, you have less energy in the system, and we've seen a crash on Wall Street, and we've seen financial crashes that cooled it down by default. Right? And the recession that we're in worldwide because of the financial crisis essentially is cooling the temperature down. Or you drop the amount of volume in the system. In Egypt, they killed off the internet trying to cool off the communications between their citizenship. Right? Or you reduce the number of molecules in the system. In Syria, they're just killing the citizenry outright to try and slow down that movement. Right? And so in geography after geography and industry after industry, we face this issue where society cannot keep up. Or we can expand the container. And this is slightly theatrical, but this date was from that date onwards, when the first space station crew lifted off, we've always had, from that date onwards, we've always had at least one person off the planet. Not every human being's been on the planet the whole time. And very dramatically, 2 days ago, we had Elon Musk launching SpaceX. And maybe that's where we need to go. Maybe we need to figure out how to expand the container, because we're not dealing very well from a societal point of view managing these technologies at this pace. Thank you very much. I'm now going to hand the microphone to Brad, who's going to talk through one specific implementation, one example of where these technologies are making a huge difference. Brad, welcome.
Can we get my clicker there? Good afternoon, everybody. Nobody did. Shall we bring up the president? So I'm going to talk to you about a technology I'm working on as an advisor to Google. It's the car that drives itself. And I want to tell you why I'm working on it, because I believe it's one of the few computer technologies that's going to change the world in an incredibly radical way. Many people don't realize just how much we have let cars take over our world and how much we've let them do to us. And when software gets in control of cars, the results are going to be remarkable. They're going to be even more remarkable when they get the slides up on the screen. Some people call what we do AI. There we go. AI is easy. Actually, it's AV that turns out to be hard. So let's take a look at some of the issues that I'm going to cover in describing what cars that drive themselves, or as I call them, robo-cars, will mean for the world. First of all, we're going to see a dramatic change about the number of people that are killed and injured by cars. We may be able to see a dramatic reduction in the amount of energy we use for transportation. We're going to change how cities work in terms of parking and in terms of traffic. And we're also going to change how shipping and commerce and everything else work in cities by changing delivery. But the first one is the most important. It's saving lives, and human drivers simply aren't very good. They are killing a lot of people. In fact, around the world, 1.2 million people are killed every year in car accidents, 34,000 in the United States and about 27,000 in Russia every year. 27,000 Russians killed every year, 50 million people injured around the world every year by car accidents. It turns out to be the 7th leading cause of death, ahead of many of the major diseases, and the 3rd leading cause of years of life taken, because it often kills people when they're young. In addition, in the United States, they worked out that basically there were $230 billion spent every year dealing with the cost of traffic accidents, about 2.5% of the GDP. That actually worked out to about 8 cents a mile, which is around 1.6 rubles a kilometer. At the time they did this, gasoline was cheap enough that it was actually more than the price of gasoline. That every mile you drove, you spent more on the eventual accidents you were going to have than you spent on the gasoline, or at least society did. We also spend, if you think about it, 50 billion hours, that's a US number, doing this. Is that the most productive use of our time? And I think that's about 8% of the GDP going to moving steering wheels. Now, 40% of those fatalities come from drinking. Now, I know here in Russia there's no drunk driving or drinking, right? I've been told that all the Russians tell me they don't drink. 80% of those accidents come from inattention. Robots actually don't drink and they don't lie about it, and that's going to make a big change. We also give up 41 hours a year of our life in the United States to congestion. I think it's about 5,000 in Russia. We have 3 parking spaces for every car, and someone estimated that 60% of the land in the city of Los Angeles, which is admittedly an outlier, that 60% of that land belongs to garages and driveways and parking lots and roads, belongs to the car. 25% of the energy that we use goes to cars, and a similar amount of our greenhouse gas emissions comes from cars. So many people have thought that cars that can drive themselves were something from science fiction. And that changed recently. This is real garage innovation, as we like to say in the software business. And it's not turned out to be making something as smart as a human being. It's turned out to be making something maybe not even as smart as a horse. And it is possible to do it. Now I'm going to show you briefly, there we go, a video of how this began when the US military held contests to build self-driving cars. And many of the first entrants were rather funny looking and didn't get very far. But by the time they held their second contest, 5 different, yes, that's my friend Anthony forgetting to turn his stabilizer on, 5 different cars completed a 150-mile course in the desert back in 2005, going down these empty desert roads, driving down windy mountain ravines, as you can see here, basically dealing with all the circumstances of rural driving. They did another contest later where they had urban driving, where you had to deal with other cars and streets and so on in 2007. Well, Google hired the winners of these various contests to build the next generation of self-driving car. And here you see it. This vehicle has gone now 400,000 kilometers on ordinary city streets like this, driving in traffic with other cars, stopping at stop signs, making turns, dealing with pedestrians. We thank these people here for participating in our research. All of the, not necessarily a Moscow street, that's a bit further. This is how the car sees in 3D. I'm going to show you a little bit more of it. As it moves around, it sees in all directions at once. It's able to handle things like people in crosswalks, busy. These are slightly busier streets with traffic lights and people turning in directions, stopping when joggers are going across the road, going through the toll booths on the Golden Gate Bridge, moving down coastal roads in tourist areas. This is Monterey in California, the Cannery Row. They've taken it down windy mountain roads, past things that probably would scare you if you were driving up the road. It sees the same day or night because it's seeing with its own light it emits rather than the light of the sun. And we even took it down the famous windiest street in the world in San Francisco, Lombard Street, if you've ever been there. People have also done things with it like merge onto a freeway at high speed. Here we see the car doing that. This is a view from the window of the car, sped up a little. And some people have even programmed the cars to park in ways I don't recommend. So this is something that Google has done, and as I said, run 400,000 kilometers already on the streets. Other companies are working on it too. You can already buy cars that park themselves, keep themselves in lanes, follow the car in front of them, detect pedestrians, detect cars that you might be hitting and hitting the brakes for you. Next year, or sorry, this year, the 2013 Mercedes S-Class is going to feature a self-driving function for traffic jams. So less than 40 kilometers an hour, it will stay in the lane and follow the car in front. All the other car companies have projects. Cadillac just announced a Super Cruise product for 2015. General Motors and Toyota and so on all have functions like this. They're not at the level of what Google has built, but it's coming from all the different companies. So this is a message that remarkably software and programmers can save the world. I couldn't find anything that would be quite as dramatic in terms of what would change the world with computer software as it turns out cars are. Cars have taken up so much of our life, and when we bring Moore's law to cars, the changes are going to be dramatic. This is the sensor that made it all happen you see on top of the car. It's a laser sensor called a LIDAR, and that means it's a light radar. It basically can see the world in 3D. It knows how far away every pixel is. It doesn't just take a picture. So there's no need to, pull out, oh, that's a pedestrian against a background, or that's a car. You see a 3D model of the world, and so you don't make those sort of mistakes. Here again is the short video of the car driving, seeing all the world in 3D, identifying all the other vehicles, trees, and pedestrians, all in 360 degrees, and of course, paying attention all the time. It never stops to send a text message. I mean, it does send text messages, but it doesn't stop looking when it sends text messages. At the front of the car is also a radar, so that is able to see a little further and also see underneath cars in front of you. That's an important sensor. There is a GPS in the car, but you'll be surprised to learn that we don't use the GPS for a great deal more than you do. It's just to know roughly where we are. It's actually the laser that figures out exactly where the car is and what to do. That's good because a GPS goes out when you go through a tunnel or through certain areas of the city, and you wouldn't want to have your car just veer off the road every time your GPS went out. So what does it mean to have this, to have mobility on demand, the ability perhaps to pick up your cell phone and say, even faster than Get Taxi, to say, I need a car right now and I want it to take me downtown, and to have that car roll up to the door within seconds. And inside that car is actually a pleasant work environment with a screen or a desk or phone or movies or books or whatever you want. If there's several of you in the car, it's face-to-face and you're having a conversation rather than all looking in the same direction. And all of this happening without any central control, without any changes to the infrastructure. This can have huge consequences for energy. So it turns out that we use, as I said, 25% of our energy to drive cars. But what if we took, instead of the big Hummer or 5-passenger sedan or SUV that we drive today, what if we took the right vehicle for the trip? What if you picked up your phone and summoned a vehicle, and because it said it's only me, and I'm only going across town, you got a very small light car? Something that could zip through traffic, something that didn't use much energy to go. You would never buy this car, but you would be very happy to ride in it occasionally, and you could own a car that meets some of your needs and not all of your needs. You might even let your car rent itself out and work for you when you're not in it. I know it's very common for Russians to hire themselves out as taxi drivers to make a little extra money. So you could actually own a car which does that for you and saves you the trouble of doing the work. It turns out, by the way, that the vehicles as efficient as that small one I was just showing you are so efficient that they're not just 10 times more efficient than cars in the energy they use. They're 10 times more efficient than the transit systems of the United States. Now you're going to say to me, well, United States transit is very bad, and you'd be absolutely right. But Russian transit is much better, maybe 2 or 3 times better, but this is still maybe twice as good or as Japanese transit, which is even better than Russian transit. It's remarkable how much energy we can save. We can enable technologies in transportation that we haven't been able to market before. The first cars that people made were actually electric, but people didn't want to buy them once roads got longer and you needed to take longer trips. But we've known how to make a short-range electric car for a long time. We haven't known how to get people to buy it because they're scared of the battery running out, they're scared of how far they can go, how long it takes to recharge. But robots don't care about how convenient it is to refuel or recharge. Suddenly new fuels, electrical, hydrogen, whatever new fuel you want becomes possible when we let the robots worry about refueling and recharging our cars. We can have a much more efficient energy system. This is so much saving that in the United States I've calculated if we switched our urban trips, not our longer trips, but our urban trips, to efficient vehicles, that would save 200 million tons of CO2 every year and would mean the United States would not have to import any foreign oil anymore. Now, that's a good thing in the United States. I know Russians want a lot of oil exports, and so they may not want to hear that people don't need as much oil. But the reality is that's good for the planet. Now, there's going to be some interesting policy implications of making this happen, and I am very short on time. But I will show you that, for example, in the state of Nevada, the law was passed just recently, which is actually allows the licensing of these autonomous vehicles, and this is one of our cars with the very first autonomous vehicle testing license plate in the state of Nevada. We're hoping to see lobbying from groups that will want this, people like the old who are losing their ability to drive, people like drunks who want to get home from clubs without having to drive. I've also said that Jews will be lobbying for this because there's nothing that Jews will enjoy more than arguing about whether it's legal to ride in this car on Saturday. Let's pretend that nothing is perfect, though. There will be downsides. We may see a city with less walking. We may actually see more sprawl rather than less. It was the car in the 20th century which redesigned cities and turned them into groups of cities with suburbs and so on. The car will redesign cities again as it's driven by software. We may see people instead deciding that they want a robotic RV, which is not just one RV, but 5 motorhomes that follow them everywhere they go and then dock and form a house. Very convenient, but not very green for the environment. We, of course, have to worry about the risk of computer intrusion and bugs, and the military wants these vehicles to build killer robots. That's something we're not particularly fond of. We're working on the civilian part of it. Click. We're also going to see privacy implications of this technology as we send vehicles around the roads with sensors and cameras on them all the time. And we're going to see implications of our freedom. For example, the police may wish to order our vehicle to pull over or even to take us to the police station. If you saw the movie Minority Report with Tom Cruise, that very thing happens. He's in a car that's driving itself. And while that's just a movie, the police actually do want this ability. We also have to worry that terrorists might use and fill them up with explosives and send them to a particular address, and whether people will limit our freedom by doing this. There are also barriers. One of the problems in getting this technology adopted is that people are afraid of robots. People just don't like being killed by robots. Now, that's supposed to be funny. The point is not that people don't like being killed by robots, but somehow they're more willing to be killed by drunks. And even if the robots are driving very safely and driving much better than the drunks and killing fewer people, some people may push back and say, you know, because this software made a mistake and it hurt someone, we should ban it, even though that would cause more people to die. So we have to work out the liability system, we have to work out how the regulators are going to deal with it, and there is this small matter of programming. Click. Hello? There we go. But I'm very excited because I want to tell you the lessons of the internet and why it's bizarrely an internet company that is making this technology. This is going to bring our friend Moore's Law into transportation. Transportation is an industry that's gotten maybe twice as good every 100 years. Computers are something that gets twice as good every 18 months. If we have software driving cars, no, we won't make them twice as fuel efficient and we won't necessarily make them twice as fast. But we will make changes that are very dramatic, the kind of pace that's happened on the internet world. We're going to have competing companies innovating, getting products that are bought, and then we're going to compare that with the 19th century methods that subways and everything else use today. It's going to be very dramatic. It's going to be the lesson of the internet brought into cars. Actually, sorry, I wanted to... No, I'm not going to cover it. Just the main nice thing is that we get early adopters to buy the transportation. Now, early adopters are basically stupid people with too much money. They'll buy the 3G phone and then immediately 3 months later buy the 4G phone, throw away the old one. But they're great people because they'll buy the latest cars from all the different companies and they will make this technology possible. I'll very briefly touch on parking. Robot cars don't have to park. They do what's legally called standing. They can sit in front of a driveway or a fire hydrant because they can move out of the way at any moment. They can double park along along the sides of the street. They could even park on the subway, on the sidewalks, as you seem to do here. But get out of the way when someone needs to get by. This allows us to have a huge amount of parking, and in fact, I believe we're going to be able to turn many of our parking lots back into parks. I know some people will turn them to office buildings, but I hope some of them will turn into parks. We're also going to see the ability to have vast reductions in traffic and congestion because of a whole variety of factors that I've unfortunately run out of time to not get into, but we can talk about that at lunch in questions. But I believe that if you had a world, this is some decades away, but a world where all the cars were software driven, or most of them were, that we could actually put 15 times as many people down the roads as we do today without any traffic congestion, with a smooth, quick trip. In fact, not even hitting traffic lights because you know exactly what the traffic lights are going to do. Finally, I'll say that there's one remarkable thing in the United States. I don't know if it's true in Russia, but we've decided there's one product we must be able to get within 30 minutes in our cities. I don't know why this is the most important product in the world, why it's the one thing we have to get in 30 minutes. But imagine a world where delivery robots can bring you anything in 30 minutes, whether it's a guest bedroom or exercise machine or a machine tool or anything you need for your house. You may not even have to own property in the same way. Stores will change because you'll be able to get anything very quickly. Food will change, and cooking. So many things are going to change when there's very cheap, very quick delivery done by robots. So that's why I've made this dedication to change the world by having software drive cars. I don't know how many of you know the words of the famous American President John F. Kennedy, but I'm going to borrow them a little bit and say that we need to dedicate ourselves to achieving the goal before the next decade is out of a computer driving a man to lunch at noon and returning him safely to work. I think that few other projects can really affect the world so much. So thanks very much. I don't...